Hey guys, this is a topic I've wanted to discuss for a while, but honestly it's a pretty complicated one, so I was a bit apprehensive about it. But I think it's not only really interesting, but also really important in understanding how history actually works. The topic is whether or not Mycenae was a politically unified civilization, or made up of many smaller polities. While that might sound fairly basic on the surface, it's an absolute rabbit hole. The culture we call Mycenae existed from roughly 1600 to 1100 BC, and was based on mainland Greece. If you know the big war against Troy with the horse and Brad Pitt, these were the guys doing the attacking. The time period they were based in is known as the Bronze Age, and it was the time of insane connectivity. I mean, this whole area was mega advanced technologically, but in my eyes, especially so politically and economically. Due to its significance, the period is probably the most angrily debated area of historic academics I have ever come across, and the question of the Mycenaean political system is quickly coming to the front of conversation in the field. There are currently two major schools of thought. Either the Mycenaeans were spread across Greece, where independent Mycenaeans controlled certain holdings, and probably fought against rival Mycenaeans, or the whole area was controlled by one true king, who dominated mainland Greece. Without a doubt, Mycenaean systems were based around what we call today palaces, but back in the day really were just centres for the surrounding area. While this is all anybody ever really shows of them, in truth the surrounding area around these big walls was populated with presumably lower class citizenry and a basic kind of town situation. In a Mycenaean palace you can be sure to find a few things, but especially a throne room and manufacturers. The person who sat on the throne, and was probably the boss of the palace, was called a Wanax, and it seems he had a second in command known as a Loagetes, who sometimes had a cute mini throne room to the side. The main purpose of these palaces was essentially to tax and synthesize goods from the surrounding area. Hence the reason you have so many good manufacturers actually at the palace. All the stuff like olives, oils, perfumes, animals, metals, grains, woods. It's coming to this one centre, and somebody's got to make stuff out of it. Whether or not the Wanax controlled those manufacturers, however, is heavily debated. They may have just been independent people who lived in the palace or surrounding area and needed access to incoming materials. Additionally, the Mycenaeans actually did have writing in a script called Linear B. It actually took a long time for us to decipher the script because the guy who first got his hands on it at the beginning of the 20th century, named Sir Arthur Evans, wanted to be the first one to decipher it, so he wouldn't share the artifacts with anybody else. Mind you, this is the same guy who literally excavated Troy using dynamite, so I don't know why I'm surprised. The script only survives on clay tablets, which only survived because they were inadvertently baked when the palaces burned down. And yes, as you might gather from that, things didn't end too well for the Mycenaeans, but more on that later. We only have a very specific segment of their writing, and we only get very specific information, which is in large part about taxation. Most of our tablets record things like, so-and-so brought in 10 bushels of wheat and 4 cows this year, but he still owes 20 sheep from last year. But they do vary a bit, like one which records an argument between the palace and a local priestess, who contends she shouldn't have to pay tax because she lives on God's land. Some things never change. You can kind of get a picture for how this would have worked. As most of the tablets are found in areas like this at the front of the gate, you can imagine people would bring in things and someone would record their taxation. In recording the place names of where various taxes have come from on the tablets, it also lays out the proposed areas which palaces controlled, although maps like this are quickly becoming very outdated. So much of Mycenaean Greece is unexcavated, and archaeologists have proposed the locations of palaces all over the place in Greece. So think of maps like this like 2006 Google Earth rather than a short thing. While this evidence is super cool, the main thing we need to pay attention to is that Linear B evidence only records a small segment of Mycenaean society, only going one way and only in a specific location. We have no records of any kind of direct political discourse, no building projects, no foreign trade, and certainly no hard constitutional evidence about their political system. It is possible that the Mycenaeans used some kind of paper to record this kind of stuff, but as it stands we only have these brief glimpses through tablets that accidentally survived. Probably the complete opposite of what the Mycenaeans actually would have wanted us to have. That said, I hope at this point you can understand the general hypothesis that Mycenae was made up of multiple independent states across mainland Greece, which had one of these palatial structures at their centre. The idea is that each of these palaces and their Wanax was a politically independent entity that taxed their land, made dedications to their gods, and were a specific culture of their own. There is more explicit evidence for them being distinct cultures as well. Lots of palaces across Greece feature different, unique architecture from their counterparts, especially when it comes to the throne rooms, and even ceramics and goods that are associated with each palatial structure do differ quite a bit. So we've got strong literary and archaeological evidence for this interpretation, but in history it only takes a tiny piece of evidence to change everything. In the early 20th century, a group of texts was excavated which belonged to the Hittites, a powerful civilization which was prominent in the same period as the Mycenaeans. In these texts, the king and kingdom of Ahiyawa is mentioned numerous times as not only a thorn in the side of the Hittites, able to bring to bear great armies, but also a power on par with even the Egyptians. While there once was intense debate as to what was meant by Ahiyawa, through some linguistic wizardry, historians now accept that it was in reference to Mycenae. In one text, the Hittite king sweats over what gift he should be sending the Mycenaean king, and actually takes some gold and silver out of his gift to the Egyptians to give it to the Mycenaeans. In another, a scribe lists the kings of equal rank to the Hittites as those of Babylonia, Assyria, Egypt, and Ahiyawa, although curiously he then scribbles out Ahiyawa. Another text describes a passive-aggressive situation between the Hittites and the Ahiyawans over territory surrounding Miletus, which not only has archaeological evidence for Mycenaean occupation, but was across the Aegean from mainland Greece, indicating these Ahiyawans had a long reach. The ways in which Mycenae is discussed in the texts does seem to strongly contradict the idea that the continent was made up of smaller, weaker, independent states, but it is about to get a lot more complicated. Although now when we say Mycenae, we mean the entire culture of Bronze Age mainland Greece, back in the day it was in fact a specific palace and location. The specific location and palace is what the Hittites meant by Ahiyawa. So the theory that mainland Greece was unified, if it is to be based on these ancient texts, also means that the palace of Mycenae itself must have been the capital of that political system. Some scholars then contend that Mycenae was in too poor of a location to have been able to dominate the mainland political scene. But this is debatable. A man named Antigonus Gonatas would, in the wild times after the death of Alexander the Great, control mainland Greece with only a few select barracks across the mainland, not dissimilar to the palatial structures of the Mycenaeans. Also important is the fact that many of these Hittite texts were written about 1400 BC, whereas we don't really have any fully completed palatial structures at Mycenae till about 1250 BC. Along the same vein, the megawalls, which surround many of the palatial structures, weren't built to 1250-ish, which begs the question, were all these palatial structures gearing up against each other as time went on, signifying independence? Certainly the walls would have been welcome during the 11th century, when the Bronze Age effectively ended after a mysterious group known only as the Sea Peoples came through the Mediterranean and burned everybody except for the Egyptians to the ground, hence our Mycenaean tablets. This is probably a conversation for another time though. Honestly, the amount of extra arguments either way you could tack onto the end here is humongous, so I'm going to stop it here because it gets way too dense way too quickly. But really, you have the basic jigsaw pieces now, so let me know what you think. Was it unified? Was Mycenae under one king, or were all of these palaces independent polities? It's such a deep and complicated topic for something that seems so basic at surface level. And if you want to have a closer look, you can literally build a career off the back of this debate. And I've got a few texts I would recommend in the description if you want to have a look, and I certainly commend anyone for getting deep into this. Anyway, thanks for watching guys, subscribe if you enjoyed, and have a great day.